Getting started grading in Dolby Vision can be very easy. First, you need an HDR mastering monitor and a color grading system that supports Dolby Vision. Then, you grade your project in HDR first, and once your HDR grade is finished, you use the Dolby Vision tools to analyze all of the graded shots. This generates the metadata required for a Dolby Vision master. And finally, you render out the master.
And now, Dolby Vision analysis tools are available at no cost. You don't need any additional license to get started. In this video, we'll walk you through a quick example, from HDR grading all the way through to delivery. I've already brought in all my clips and assembled a timeline, so let's begin by setting up our project for Dolby Vision. The first thing I'll do is open up the project settings and select Color Management. Inside Color Management, I need to change my master color science setting to DaVinci YRGB Color Managed and enable Use Separate Color Space and Gamma. Now, an important thing to note is that what Resolve Color Management calls gamma is actually shorthand for any electro-optical transfer function, or EOTF, not just gamma curves. Then, I'll select my input, timeline, and output color spaces and gammas. For this project, the majority of our clips are red RAW files, so the input color space doesn't matter. Resolve will debayer the RAW into the timeline color space and gamma, so we can leave those settings at their default. Under Timeline and Output Color Space, we'll be delivering P3D65 and ST2084. This sets our project to the P3 color space and the ST2084 EOTF, which is the SMPTE standardization of the PQ curve that's the foundation of most HDR systems, including Dolby Vision. Finally, I'll enable the Dolby Vision checkbox, which exposes Dolby Vision controls on the color page. I'll choose version 4.0, the latest version at the time of this recording, and select my mastering display. For this project, it's 4000 nit P3 D65 ST2084 full.
All right, so now that Joey has set up color management, he's going to start grading.
I'll use my normal grading tools while looking at my HDR mastering monitor. Grading in HDR is actually easier in a lot of ways than grading in SDR. Because this footage was shot with a pretty wide dynamic range, the grading controls just feel more natural in HDR. I'm not fighting to squeeze all this dynamic range into a tiny SDR container anymore. I can better see what the camera captured and grade creatively with a lot more freedom.
Once Joey finishes grading the timeline, the next step is to generate what's called L1 metadata. This is the base metadata required to output a Dolby Vision master, and it's created by analyzing all the shots you have in a project. Dolby's algorithm determines the maximum, minimum, and average brightness levels of each shot. And that data is used during playback on consumer devices to determine how the HDR grade is tone mapped to each individual display. And this metadata can also be used to output a tone mapped lower nit HDR version or an SDR version of the grade.
So now that I've finished my HDR grade, I'm going to generate that L1 metadata and preview in Dolby Vision using a Rec 709 SDR target. I'm going to select the Dolby Vision palette. Under Analyze, I'll click All, and Resolve will go through the entire timeline and analyze every shot. Once the analysis is complete, we can enable Tone Mapping Preview to view a tone-mapped version on an SDR display and right here in the viewer. In a later video, we'll explore simultaneous HDR and SDR monitoring. So now that all of our metadata is generated, we're ready to render out a Dolby Vision master. Switching to the Deliver page, I'll export an IMF package. Resolve features the ability to export a Dolby Vision IMF package, which will contain both the image master and the Dolby Vision metadata. Under Format, I'll choose IMF. Under Codec, I'll select Kakadu JPEG 2000. And under Type, I'll choose a Dolby Vision preset and the corresponding resolution. Then, I'll give the composition a name. And I'll change the content type to short and the profile level to main level 6, sublevel 3, since this is a UHD 2398 master, which also sets the maximum bitrate. And I'll set my render destination folder and name the file the same as we named our composition. I'll add it to my render queue, then hit render. And that's it. Our Dolby Vision master is done and ready for delivery or encoding.
Now, one thing to remember is that the metadata generation step can happen at any time after your HDR grade is finished. If you want to just do the HDR grade and then add the Dolby metadata later, you can. For example, you may have multiple versions for international delivery, or the need to add inserts, headers, and tails, or other items for each point of distribution. This is easy if you render out your PQ master to a file and then add the metadata once your encoding service master version is ready. And many tools provide this solution.
So as you can see, delivering a project in Dolby Vision doesn't have to be complicated. To meet the base requirements for a Dolby Vision master, all that's needed is an HDR grade in PQ at a minimum of 1000 nits, with a color gamut greater than Rec. 709. Once the grade is done, perform the automatic Dolby Vision analysis to generate L1 metadata, a process that doesn't require any additional hardware or licensing.
Now, we've only scratched the surface here, but there are a lot more tools available to creatively control Dolby Vision metadata, and we go over those in detail in later videos.